And this is a very important point to notice, which is money multiplier. It's nothing to do with Keynesian multiplier definition, and how this monetary base that has been created at the central bank, how does that change into monetary mass to have money circulating in deposits. And this small monetary base is multiplied by the banking sector, and this multiplier sometimes is called bank multiplier, and we notice that there is a great drop of this multiplier, right? As you can see, the monetary mass goes up, but the transformation into money is reduced so that the multiplier goes down, especially here. If we continue like this, we'll have the same thing. There's the monetary base changing into monetary mass. In this monetary mass, there is some kind of multiplier, which is the speed. This is a small case m that is falling. The speed is falling. And there is a strong increase of the monetary base, however. But at the same time, there are two variables that reduce the impact on the price level, which is the monetary policy in the U.S. that led to dramatic reduction of interest rates. So just to conclude this causal analysis, here's the monetary base, as I showed you. There is the bank multiplier, changes into monetary base, M, that in its turn has velocity speed in the sense of multiplier that impacts P. And there are the two variables, multiplier M and multiplier B, M and V, as factors that reduce the impact. Now, when you think of the following situation, why are these two variables going down? The reason is pretty simple. There is expectation. The lowercase m and v are small because there is an expectation that inflation is under control. Now, if you imagine, if it happens, and this has happened many times over the course of history, that expectation changes overnight. Nobody knows if it's going to happen, but it may happen, right? Here there is a fantastic mass, which is m, and if m changes, it's like lighting a match close to a gas station. And historically, one could point out, when you've had hyperinflation, they emerged slowly, and at a certain point, they almost exploded. So far, so good. Later we can go back to this and continue our discussion. Thank you.
Muito obrigado, professor Antony. Acho que ilustrou bastante para a gente.
Thank you, Professor Antony. I think it was a very good illustration of how the monetary base, which is what the central bank really can impact, is just the monetary base, nothing else. And to become a monetary mass, which is the capital case M that is up to the banks, and this variable to this day has behaved, which is the multiplier. And we don't know how this multiplier is going to behave in the future. It may change all of a sudden, and be turned into
mais M grande.
Into more of a capital M, and if that happened, which is the way I understand is what you're indicating, then there would be an inflationary scenario. Now let's listen to Dalton, to our market perspective. Dalton's from Bradesco Investment, which is a broker company. And we, more Austrian-like and more scholarly, we tend to make projections of scenarios, but oftentimes we don't get the timing right. And Dalton's job relies on him getting the timing right. So now let's listen to him.
This is the truth that's very tough. It's always hard to combat the logic of Dr. Mueller. It's very sound. As Caetano said, you can only do philosophy in Germany. In German, maybe you can only do economics in German. I have about half a dozen ideas here. And we wonder how I can defend deflation at a time like this. Minority doesn't make sense when you look at the Fed balance, at the rate it's expanding. I think part of the understanding of this problem is the idea of the match that Dr. Mueller talked to us about. The entire system that creates inflation is there. The problem is you can't create enough fire on the match as much as you would think. There's an explosive element to it. And that's why we don't have a deflation dilemma versus inflation. We have a deflation between deflation or hyperinflation. We don't have a possibility of moving in a continuum of low deflation to low inflation in the way that Bernanke thinks might be possible. Expanding the balance sheet of the Fed 2.5 times in a little more than 3 years, I think that is proof of what I'm saying. Maybe it can be expanded 5 times, 10 times, 20 times. This would not be low inflation. Either you generate deflation, as it has bin happening, or maybe something else that we don't know what it is. Maybe superinflation, the history of inflation, more than 50% a month. Maybe something in the middle between a super and a hyperinflation. I'm sure it won't be a desired inflation of 2% a year that Billy Bob Bernanke thinks he can do with his quantitative easing. Considering this monetary voluntarism, we call him Billy Bob Bernanke. It's very clear that we need to expose the challenge that exists there to fix a problem that was created. He always wanted to avoid deflation. He saw deflation as the cause of the Great Depression. Imagine a poker player. Remember this famous speech where Bernanke said, "I'm not going to let this happen. Friedman taught us about this." I can't imagine a poker player who would be so unskilled. Any professional Fed watcher can tell. I think this kind of mistake are beyond the theoretical aspect, but they're practical errors. You need to have a card you can play when you need it. He had all these advantages, but he gave that away. Not just central bankers do this. All the mysterious information, messages from Greenspan, that whole hermeneutic that was necessary to understand his obtuse messages had a reason for being. The fact is that before I list some of these ideas, we're not talking about rocket science here. All the difference between inflation and deflation is an issue of definition. The Austrians, by definition, have a concept that's a variation in monetary aggregates. In the mainstream, maybe perhaps because of a change in time, we talk about an increase or a reduction in price by an average of prices. An average that has several problems. I don't know what it means to add apples and bananas, or add ties with something else. The price of phone, the price of their light bill. The only way you can add all this is through a monetary expression. This I know. Monetary expression is money. We can talk about what aggregate money is, but there's nothing more impossible from a methodological standpoint to think that price variation can be measured as it is today. It's nonsensical. It's ridiculous to think that I can add nuts and ties. It's beyond the scope of possibility, except through a monetary expression. I prefer the Austrian definition. It doesn't enter this trap of a hedonic adjustment I need to make for the CPI. I prefer to focus on the second. Change in prices is inflation. By a methodological construct. Now you've already left the boat. I know I'm a minority. There's an issue here that I think was treated with less emphasis with Austrians, which is deflation of the greater aggregates, especially of credit. The focus was always, both in the mainstream and the Austrians, the focus is on the categories, which were the narrow aggregates. The dynamics that command the prices is not a broad aggregate, it's credit. As we multiply credit, and credit by the modern meaning of the term, can be the entire combination from a CDO to all those other unpronounceable alphabet soup in English. That's all credit. But the dynamic of prices, which is what people care about, if I'm going to buy a bond, I depend on it. It's not enough to know the aggregates. I need to know if the price is going up, that we can observe these prices going up. Are the central banks going to have an opposite reaction, and should I buy or not a bond? This is so complex that from a methodological standpoint, I need to imagine inflation and deflation having a basic concept of monetary aggregates. In my worldly decision on a day-to-day basis, I need to think about the impact of this on the CPIs and the price indexes. And this is why it's possible to defend any of these viewpoints, as long as we define them.